The 2024 World Chess Championship between Gukesh and Ding continues. We just had Game 8 conclude. Let me show you what happened. So, first of all, most importantly, Ding has the white pieces, so we get to see what he's going to come up with for this game. We saw a lot of repeats. We've also seen, in my opinion, quite a few different moves from this World Championship. In the past, we've seen World Championships just repeat the same opening over and over. That does not feel what these two, like what these two are up to. C4, how about another brand new move for us? C4 is a move, if you play it, you're probably very excited to see a game like this, especially C4 E5, just the absolute main line of this opening. A good way to think of C4 as well is kind of just a reversed Sicilian. So it's as if E4 C5 was played, except white has an extra tempo. So how could this possibly be a bad opening? Knight C3, bishop B4, and this is actually an opening or a specific variation that I play as well, bishop B4. White decides to jump in with the knight to D5, and very similar to a lot of the positions you can just imagine if you flip the board. This is just like bishop b5 for white and bishop takes on c6, kind of those Rossolimo positions that we saw in a previous World Championship. But obviously with white here, you've got that extra time, so he does go knight d5 and bishop e7. If you haven't seen this line before, it's probably very confusing what black is up to. Why are we wasting time with the bishop, and then why are we just offering up our bishop to be taken? Really, you're playing against the fact that white has spent so much time to do this, and after the e-pawn gets defended, we see c6 to kick the knight out. Of course, you're going to take the bishop on e7, and Gukesh, instead of queen takes e7, which I would say, like, I've played this position before, I almost always take with the queen, not because knight takes is a terrible move, but it's an unusual move. It's unorthodox, and this is why I think preparation comes in handy, because it gives you the confidence to play a move that you might just be overlooking. Not a terrible move, but you just instinctively always take with the queen. Here, Gukesh plays knight takes, and I was looking at it and I thought, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. I probably wouldn't play knight takes e7 unless I had prepared a certain way to develop the rest of my pieces here. But it did make some sense. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of clever. So knight takes e7, bishop g2, and he follows it up with f6. And this is pretty much the reason right here why you need to have something prepared. Because queen takes e7 is logical, good, but knight takes e7, the engine actually prefers. But after bishop g2, how are you playing d5? Your pawn is hit on e5. It just doesn't seem to make sense, especially because f6 is not a move you would normally play, right? F6 is a move we stay away from in the openings because it's considered a little bit risky. But here, engine approved and everything, supporting that pawn on e5, getting ready to play d5 yourself, and you have a light squared bishop, so you're fine to put all your pawns on dark squares like this. So I thought that the opening idea from Gukesh was very interesting. Already I was intrigued by the game when I saw Ding play c4. Gukesh responded with what I thought was a pretty interesting way to develop. So we were in new territory. The one thing that I have to give both players credit for in this World Championship match is the variety of openings and different positions that we are seeing. Castles, bishop e6, b3. The bishop doesn't really have a lot to be proud of developing on this diagonal, so definitely we'll see the bishop on b2 or a3. d5, bishop a3. Happy to offer this pawn for the moment. Now, yes, you could consider taking this pawn, but I think really what's going to happen is that white's going to open up the center, maybe with a move like d4. You've got the open b file if black decides to take. And so I was thinking just d4, but rook b1 could also be possible. The point is, it's just way too much going on, way too quickly before black is even castled. The two bishops need an open position, and that's exactly what we're going to get. For example, something like this would be a total disaster and dead loss for black. So he castles, obviously prioritizing that. Now, sure, it's time to defend the pawn because black is castled and a little bit safer, maybe ready to take this. Black plays a5. Looks a little bit kind of like a cagey move. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but knight a6 to b4 is one of the ideas from this. It blocks that bishop entirely, and yeah, it's just nice to control that b4 square. So I kind of like the idea of knight a6, knight b4 to go in front of this light squared bishop on, or sorry, white bishop on a3. Okay, pawn to a5 played. Knight e1. This is definitely a move we need to talk about here, because what the heck is knight e1? There are a lot of variations where this pawn structure is undermined nicely by an f pawn push. So the same thing can happen if you've ever seen a structure for white. The same-ish King's Indian, where white has this pawn structure, comes to mind. Maybe you guys have had that in your games. And that's undermined pretty nicely by pawn to f5. So the same thing here. White's just making it happen by moving the knight. But pawn to f4 is a really nice idea. If this pawn goes up like that, we might have e3 to break up the position. If pawn to e4 happens, we might have d3 to break up the position. White is just looking to explode the game, open the center. We've got two bishops that need an open position. So I really like the move knight e1. I thought this was very interesting. Love to see the move f4 coming, because I knew that we were going to get a wacky kind of game, truly, because there's nothing that you can do at this point when there's so much pressure to open the position. You can't keep it closed. So I knew we were going to get some open position, and this is kind of why I would say overall that this setup from black isn't like the most popular, just because this is tough to play. It doesn't look like a very positive outlook here, dealing with these two bishops. But Gukesh, all he does is stay calm, gets out of the pin here. Now his knight is actually mobile. f4, Ding continues with the whole purpose of knight to e1. Takes on f4, rather than allowing the capture here, then white could maybe return the knight. The e-pawn would be a little bit weak, and white also enjoys the open file. So instead, black says, look, I'm happy to take. If the bishop ever makes it to this diagonal, the pawns are set up pretty nicely there. Meanwhile, the f-file is not open either. And instead, Gukesh actually takes twice here, and I was shocked that this wasn't maybe like a slightly better position for white. It's around even. Gukesh has actually been playing very well, and I think you have to be so well prepared as Gukesh in this game, because he's first of all, he's way up on time. So he really knows what's going on. Although Ding is the one who's maybe choosing this line, it's very unorthodox, and it really just comes down to who understands the ideas here, because this is not a position that these guys have played. If you think of all the positions that these chess grandmasters have encountered in their lifetime of chess, this is, first of all, I'm sure it's like one of the first times that they've played this position ever, but how many positions have they played with a similar pawn structure to this? Like similar anything to this? It's probably very unique, which means both of them are very much on their own. This is not like playing a Berlin where you're like, oh yeah, I played the first 4 moves of that opening, maybe like tens of thousands of times. So that's why I'm always excited by this type of stuff, especially in a world championship, because it just means that you get to see the true skill of the players. They're very much on their own. Knight g6, making use of being unpinned. And yeah, the rook is on a very unorthodox square here. Rook to e4. What the heck's going on? The rook can maybe drop back to e3, where it's actually very safe. This goes back to a nice pattern that I've seen before, which I can remind you guys about if you want to pick up a quick tip here. Knights against heavy pieces, pretty much any piece, but definitely heavy pieces. So rooks and queens. The rook here compared to the knight is operating at its best. If you are exactly, let's say, 1 square in between diagonally, you can think of it however you want, 2 squares away diagonally. But yeah, if there's 1 square in between the heavy piece and the knight diagonally, it's on the best possible square. So if a queen was on e4, best possible square against the knight. Rook, best square against the knight. It's because the knight just takes, 3 moves to even make a threat against that piece again. So it happens to be placed pretty much perfectly here. So that's why rook e4 by Ding was actually played probably pretty confidently, because he just understands the geometry of the position here. So knight a6, Now, of course, this only matters with one knight. Obviously, if another knight comes in, you might have to move that rook. Knight c2. So white's getting the pieces out. Black finally develops. We do see knight a6, which is what a5 was getting ready for. Knight b4. The bishop drops back. And yeah, I was just looking forward to this position. I wasn't sure who's better. I have to admit, I might prefer the white pieces here. But black's position, admittedly, is, you know, it's kind of easier to play when you think about it. Like, bring the rooks to the middle, maybe put the knight in. And so in the short term, it feels like, oh yeah, black's position makes a lot of sense. The bishops don't really have anywhere to go there. Okay, got it. But then in the long term, I'm actually not so sure about black's position. Then white's position starts to make more sense. Like, okay, queen d2, bishop back, maybe queen c3 could set up the pieces there. The a pawn could be a target. The knight's coming into f5, maybe d6. And so in the long term, I start to look at white's position as easier to play. That's why I don't really know who I prefer here, and the engine has it right at zeros. Okay, black brings the knight in here, very likely trying to control the c5 square. Finally time to exchange that, because you simply can't ever take like this. Time getting very low for Ding, which is pretty much a staple, I feel like, of his gameplay, especially this World Championship match. Rook b1, trying to stop the move knight b4, and after rook b1, it's kind of shocking, but here Gukesh just comes up with a honestly brilliant move. Maybe it's not that complicated, but I give him credit for it. b5. There's no worse feeling in chess than a move that you played a move to prevent. So if your opponent's like trying to play, let's say, their queen out, and you just bring something to defend that exact square, and you're like, okay, good, now he can't play it. And then he plays it anyway. It's like, okay, either he missed something or I missed something. Let's find out. So this is kind of funny. White plays rook b1. Almost like, oh yeah, let's stop knight b4. Let's stop b5. Ah, this is a good move. And then black thumps b5 on the board. And you're like, wait, what? That was the whole purpose of... Anyway, he takes... And lo and behold, queen b6 check, nice little intermezzo, allows the pawn to be recaptured, and then the pawn can go forward to the b4 square. That's basically a huge achievement for black. The pawn just jumps up to b4 out of nowhere. Let's not forget, the pawn on a2 is also hanging. Very unorthodox position for the king, but have a look at these knights. Their path to this square is damn near impossible, right? You have to come from d5 or f5. How do you get to those squares? C7, E7. So really, black's got this as an idea, but that's many moves. And white will be able to not only just defend the square, but perhaps even prevent the knight from getting there with the move e4. So pretty long-winded, even though it looks scary for white, probably not too bad. We see the move bishop b2. Look, the bishop doesn't have a future on this diagonal. Black has done a great job, I think, in this game. Gukesh has steered clear of pretty much every square the bishop has been covering, and it's just kind of worked around it. Hasn't had a problem with the bishop, just says, okay, you're controlling those squares, I'll work around it, play on other squares, and he's made it work pretty nicely. Bishop b2, the bishop says, finally, okay, like I'm done with that square. But what about the a2 pawn? To me, watching this just looked like kind of a stone cold blunder. Like, I get that white's going for the activity, but Gukesh, in my opinion, has handled the bishops tremendously. I would not have been able to do that. Playing with the knights, playing with a wide open center, it looked like a position that the bishops were going to thrive in. But not only has he maintained the balance, but he's got this b5 move in. Now he's grabbing the a2 pawn. It was all looking up for Gukesh here. Bishop d4, knight c5. Now this knight move it just looks wrong. It kind of walks yourself into a pin, and with the bishops, that's one of the most dangerous things you can do. So I wasn't sure about that. Bishop d4, knight c5. Interestingly, he was on the right track with knight c5, but the engine strongly prefers this knight to c5, and then when the rook moves over, to move the bishop back. Now, what's the difference? Well, one of the reasons is that the knight from d7 can actually be attacked. So if I'm pinning here, I'm immediately looking at what's protecting the piece that's pinned. Well, it's the knight on a6. Can I attack the knight? Well, in this case, no. So it's very hard for me to attack this knight, because a good strategy there would be, well, hang on, let me attack the piece that's defending it, and that'll help. But if the knight's on d7, all of a sudden, I can now attack this knight, which in turn attacks the knight on c5. So it just, because this knight is more of a target here, it actually would have been better to pin yourself this way so that the guy keeping everything, you know, behind the scenes, keeping everything together is the knight on a6, and that one can't be targeted. Rook c1, I mean, very natural move, right? Pinning the knight here. Bishop b3. Now, why did bishop b3 get played? It's actually a mistake here, but why was it played? Probably because the move queen c2 was being threatened, and he didn't like to see that. So instead of just moving back, which might have been a better move, instead, bishop b3, queen to e1, and that queen is definitely going to f2, where it's going to increase the pressure from this pin. So all of a sudden, things have flipped. Gukesh has done everything seemingly perfectly. Down on time is Ding Liren. Choosing the wrong knight from Gukesh turns out to be a costly mistake, as he grabs the pawn but chooses the wrong knight, and now he's stuck in a pin. Yes, you've got two connected pass pawns on the outside of the board, but they're just not, they don't have time to get all the way down the board before I'm about to win a piece. Rook c8, and oh my goodness, you're pinned every which way here. Super uncomfortable, and all of these pieces can be targeted. Bishop e3, a very good move by Ding. Knight to d4 is coming, hitting this bishop, and you can see there's just no good way to recapture it without losing something, so you have to react. And then maybe that sets up bishop h3 to win a piece here, right? You're pinned here, you're pinned here. After bishop h3, you'd be pinned here as well. There's no way you're surviving that many pins in a chess game. It's just impossible. The bishops are starting to come alive, and it's funny that just that one knight move has really cost Gukesh here. Rook c7, knight d4. Rook c7 getting out of this pin as well, kind of important there. And we do see the move knight c6. Definitely the best move according to the engine. Ding finds it. The idea is normally you would just look at this and say, well, that's a blunder. Two pieces for the rook is not worth it. But one of the reasons you're doing this is to make sure that the rook disappears, and the rook was guarding the knight on c5. So we're trading two pieces that are not having anything to do with the knight on c5, and we're getting one of the pieces that was defending it. And that means with this light squared bishop, can't add any defense. And so Ding picks up material here. Now, despite picking up material, not only is time very low, and by the way, it's evened up because Gukesh, you know, has kind of let things slip and blundered by dropping material on c5 here. But time is low. Opposite bishops are on the board, which with queens here actually means that white's king is in some danger as well, but also provides some decent drawing chances later. Black plays h6, just a nice enclave for the king being prepared here. King e1, kind of the same for white. Like, where is the safest square for the king? King g1 is a square you think of, but at the same time, there's going to be some checks to worry about. The pawns are moving. It's impossible to find a totally safe square here. There's a lot of counterplay. There truly is. Tons of counterplay coming in this game. It's far from over. Despite Ding, he has to be happy winning that material. But despite that, he's still got such a lot of work to do. So king e1, black decides to finally mobilize the pawns. Makes sense. Knight e5 played. So a very interesting move, because we actually see king d2 in response. Queen d8 and queen takes a5. To me, this immediately comes to mind, right? Why would I not pick up a pawn with check? So the engine actually really likes knight takes d3, queen h1, and where can the king go? So if the king goes to d2 to guard the c1 rook, then we can start by taking here. Okay, king goes back. We can give another check. We can give another check. Where can the king go? You're seeing how the king does not have a lot of options. If the king starts running out of the board, there's going to be some check up here, whatever, and the rook's going to be picked up. You're also going to see that if the king is staying back here, then the best you've got is a draw. So it feels like a position where not only bishop h5 can come in and, like, for example, here, we might just be in trouble. I don't know. There's bishop f2, queen f3. Like at this point, I'm starting to worry that we're going to lose the game up a rook. So not only is there that, there's a draw at will, but knight d3 looks insanely scary. Ding did not want any part of that. He plays king d2. Queen g2. I wonder what Gukesh is threatening here. Again, this knight f3 move. It should be noted that there's just no way for Gukesh to keep everything under control here, right? He's having a hard time with these pawns. The pawn can go to b3 where it's defended, but advancing both pawns, keeping both pawns is quite a difficult task here. So instead, he's going for counterplay, queen g2. He might just pick up these pawns and trade them for those. That's an idea, but also, of course, knight f3 is a massive threat here, which is why queen f2 gets played. And the queen back to d4. Now, white's already realizing with low time that, hang on, with all these checks here and the pawns coming out the board, this is insanely scary, right? This is not easy at all. The queen goes back to d4, and I was actually wondering about queen to a2. I was thinking, okay, is this a move? But, you know, after rook c2, there's no b3 tricks, like queen is covering, none of that. So you don't really have a move here. You kind of just have to retreat. So Gukesh is pressing and pressing, it feels like. Maybe not according to the engine, but certainly from a practical perspective, he's all over the white king here, and black's king is very, very safe on h7, right? Nothing's touching it. Bishop g6, I mean, it's a locked vault. Queen g2, queen d5, queen d4, and I don't know if you guys are like me and thought, you know, hang on a sec, is this actually a 3-time repetition? But, you know, have a look closely. This is the position, okay, but we're never going to see this one again. So the next one will be the first one, queen on g2. That's the first time. And then queen on d5. That's also the first time. And then second time, and then he changes it up with queen a2. So again, and I continue to hand over praise and compliments to Gukesh for this behavior, but sometimes you can think, oh, it backfires, he's playing on in a position he shouldn't. Here, technically, white's better by the engine, but I love the decision to play on, especially with low time. Look, Gukesh is a fighter. Ding is always ready to take a draw. And I'm not saying Ding's always ready to take a draw from the start, but I'm saying in a position where objectively a draw is like a fair result, Ding's ready to take it. And Gukesh is not. That we've seen that before. So he does go queen a2, rook c2, and he brings the queen back to e6. It looks like a blunder. It really does. But believe me, this is what Gukesh intended. He could never hang on to both of those pawns, so instead he gives one up, misplaces the queen way offside, gets the move b3 in, with tempo, by the way, so that's why he gave that check earlier to force the rook up, so that this would come with tempo. I really like that. Bit of a clever addition. And now he re-centralizes the queen, and it's the same position, except the queen's not on d4, and black's king is a little bit safer. So white's desperately trying to re-coordinate the queen, and black is, you know, just about to make those threats like knight f3, queen takes h2 that are so significant. And at this point, Ding basically pulls the plug and says no. Queen e4 check. Let's get those queens off the board before black makes more threats. The bishop on c5 and f7. Yeah, white's up material with the rook, but the presence of these bishops means if there's some threats going on that this bishop can contribute to, this bishop cannot defend. And that just starts to feel like you're down a piece. So getting the queens off is a huge thing for white, but again, there's just no way to do it safely. b2, and this is a forcing sequence, which is why Gukesh was okay allowing that queen trade. Bishop a2, yes, hanging the pawn, but at long last, dropping the exchange, and then we see this does work out to be a draw. Opposite bishops at the end of the game will mean an immediate draw. And whew, got to take a breather after that. I was entertained by this game. C4 in the World Championship, love to see it. I thought Gukesh's reaction was very much ready for a fight, offering the bishop pair up to Ding, playing this f6 move in the opening. Ding responding by playing knight e1 and f4, just challenging the center. I thought this was a very intriguing game. And later on, it got pretty wild. Like at many points, Gukesh I thought was dominating the way that he played the opening and middle game. I'm starting to see a clear pattern. I don't know if you guys are noticing it as well, but in the opening phase of the game, in the middle game phase, I feel like Gukesh he's really good. He's been impressive. But later on, it does feel like closer to time control, even when Gukesh is up on time, somehow he starts to falter. And Ding always seizes his opportunities, whether that's an opportunity in the previous game, for example, to save a bad position. We saw him work pretty hard to do that. Maybe in this game, it was to actually turn maybe an equal position into a better one. But in the end, Ding has his, his faults as well, which is, he had the slight advantage here and kind of let it slip away. This one, though, I have no comments on. No negative comments. This was a very tough position. So anyone that thinks Ding had the advantage here and let it slip, nothing like any of the previous games. This was a genuinely complicated position with lots of counterplay that I think Gukesh was manifesting very well. So I just thought this was a good fight. I was definitely entertained by this game personally. Love to see all the new elements in it. And again, we get a draw, but it just feels like this World Championship match is going to be decided by one single win, because that single win is so hard for these players to come by, so hard to find the confidence to play on when you have the advantage. But one thing I've seen from Gukesh is no matter what kind of position he has, he is ready to fight, ready to play. I mean, that you have to be excited by that. So that's all for this game. I will see everyone tomorrow for the recap of Game 9 of the World Chess Championship. See you then.